So what I am going to talk right now is really, really very basic as to what needs to be done in patient in between these two stages. So, as we all know, with increase in the longevity of the pulmonary arterial hypertension patients, their nature and their needs have also evolved. And new therapies should be tested not only in the terms of survival, but also in the improvement of quality of life. So, if your risk score goes from high risk category to low risk category, automatically your quality of life improves. And the treating physicians must focus on the impact of the disease as well as the medication on the patient's day-to-day life. And patients and parents should actively participate in the management of PH, and they should be provided detailed information about the disease. So we'll talk about all these parameters. I think Dr. Abraham Babu has extensively covered in the previous session as to what physical activity can do to the patients with pulmonary arterial hypertension. It was initially thought to be harmful because it can cause sudden cardiac death. The first randomized controlled trial was done in 2006 and was published in Circulation. It was use of yoga in pulmonary arterial hypertension, and which has shown a beneficial effect. There are many, many studies after that which has shown beneficial effect of exercise testing and conditioning in patients with pulmonary arterial hypertension. There is improvement in functional class, there is improvement in peak oxygen consumption, there is exercise heart rate as well as resting peak systolic PA pressures. None of them have shown very significant side effects. So what are the recommendations? How do we recommend personalized and supervised exercise testing and rehabilitation? We always don't have the expertise of Dr. Babu for us. Start in the hospital setting with light aerobic exercises like walking and leisure cycling. Appropriate adjustments with daily activities. Yoga exercises, they tend to improve, especially deep and slow breathing may have a significant role. And care should be taken so as to not to aggravate the symptoms or compromise safety. And definitely, this is a very important thing, avoid competitive sports at all, because once you are in competitive sports, you don't know where to stop. So avoid competitive sports. Next comes travel and pulmonary hypertension. It's very, very common question among the patients. Can I travel? Can I travel by air? Can I travel by road? Can I travel by rail? So road and rail travel is safe. A hypoxia may occur at very high altitude or on deep sea diving. And in this study in 2012, they have shown that with an increase in altitude, there is hypoxia. So if your baseline oxygen saturation is low, is less than 85%, the chances of having hypoxia at high altitude, especially at 6,000 meters, where most of the cabins are pressurized, is there. However, does this translate into adverse events is not what we know. And so we do not restrict the air travel, but we definitely tell that the duration of the travel should be less than 6 to 8 hours at one particular period. And in patients who have got a baseline hypoxemia, if a baseline oxygen saturation is 85%, they might require oxygen supplementation in while traveling by air. So what recommendations we give, how do we counsel the patient? So avoid a flight which is more than 8 hours of duration, keep well hydrated, take frequent walks in between to prevent episodes of DVT, avoid alcohol during the flight. And in-flight oxygen supply, so we have to give them a fit to fly certificate. And in that, if the patient is in functional class 3 or 4, or the baseline oxygen saturation is less than 85 to 90% at sea level, or the PO2, if you're doing an arterial blood gas, if it is less than 60, then we recommend that supplemental oxygen should be made available in flight. Next, very, very important question, especially in Indian scenario, because most of our patients are young females, is can I marry? Can I have children? And will my children have pulmonary arterial hypertension? So there is no contraindication to marriage, but it is definitely important to inform your prospective spouse about what the disease is, and pre-marriage counsel is extremely important. Pregnancy is definitely not recommended, and I'll come to it because there is a very, very high risk during pregnancy. Early advice of pregnancy risk, including contraception, remains paramount, especially when a patient comes to you for a pre-marriage counseling. And women who become pregnant would warrant a multidisciplinary team approach with consideration for advanced therapies. And endothelin receptor antagonists, this is a very important thing. Endothelin receptor antagonists and guanylate cyclase inhibitors, stimulants such as riociguat, are contraindicated in pregnancy. So we don't have prostacyclins which are available. Your ambrisentan, bosentan, macitentan are out of the window. What you are left with, sildenafil or tadalafil. So it is like going to a war with both your hands tied behind your back. And this is what the study was shown, has shown that there is a decrease in the mortality of the patients in the era. So in 1978 to 96, the mortality was close to 30 to 56%. In 97 to 2007, it is between 70 to 33%. But we have to realize that in this study, in a Western study, this mortality benefit was got because probably the prostacyclins were on board, and we do not have prostacyclins on board, or we still have some patients who are on prostacyclin, they have to be imported, but they're extremely costly, right? So we probably still lie in this 30 to 50% zone. And hence, and the maximum risk is during the postpartum period. If the patient has got severe RV dysfunction, fluxional class 3 or 4 with an exercise test of less than 400 meters and a BNP elevation, these are some of the worst clinical outcomes during pregnancy. And what we do as a routine now is probably we have to stop ambrisentan or bosentan because they are harmful for the fetus. Continue the sildenafil. We ask the patients to import iloprost because that is the one which is easily available and it is cost effective. And if we can give them during pregnancy and in the postpartum period, we significantly reduce the morbidity and mortality in these patients. Elective LSCS, again, it's a multidisciplinary team approach. What anesthesia to use is again a question. So we have an experience of around 5 patients now in which we have used epidural anesthesia in 4 patients, and we had to use general anesthesia in 1 patient because that patient was very, very sick with a severe RV dysfunction and severe tricuspid regurgitation, and the anesthetist was not sure whether he would be able to manage the pH crisis when the patient was delivering by LSCS. So the bottom line is to avoid pregnancy, which is kind of imperative. So what contraceptives can the patient use? Barrier contraceptives are safe, but as we all know, have got a very, very high failure rate. Hormonal contraceptives, progesterone-only pills can be used. Estrogen-containing pills, if they are very, very low levels of estrogen, can still be used. The older versions of OC pills need to be avoided. Permanent methods of contraception is preferred. If the patient already has a child before, what I advise is maybe the male partner can undergo permanent sterilization rather than subjecting the lady with pulmonary hypertension to undergo a procedure. Dual barrier contraceptions and intrauterine devices can be used. Prevention of infection and vaccination is another important thing which we need to counsel the patient, because as we all know, pneumonia in any patient is going to be difficult, and now we have got healthy patients who come with ARDS with influenza. If a patient with pulmonary hypertension develops pneumonia, we would have a lot of trouble in managing these patients. So always vaccinate them for the age-appropriate pneumococcal and influenza vaccine. And if the patient has Eisenmenger syndrome, goes without saying, good dental hygiene and infective endocarditis prophylaxis has to be told to them. Coming to anesthesia and non-cardiac surgery, as we all know that patients with pulmonary hypertension are at higher risk as compared to their other colleagues, with morbidity and mortality ranging going up to 10% in patients with severe pulmonary arterial hypertension. Again, a functional class of 2 or more, precapillary pulmonary hypertension, RV systolic dysfunction, a 6-minute walk test of less than 400, emergency surgery and surgical time of more than 3 hours, and large and rapid loss of blood are some of the worst predictors of non-cardiac surgery. To date, however, the question is which anesthetist, that is, most of the times anesthetists will come to us and ask which one should we use. So there is no advantage of using one over the other, but definitely we should try to avoid anesthetic agents which kind of decrease the systemic vascular resistance too much. Because if that happens, then the patient it would be difficult to maintain the cardiac output. So I think we have gone through this. Last but not the least is psychiatric disorders, because we kind of completely underestimate what the patient is undergoing. Most of the times there is so much information which is available on the net. If you put pulmonary hypertension prognosis, the first thing the patient sees is very poor survival. And we need to counsel the patient as to what exactly the disease is, how we are going to treat it, what exactly the prognosis is, and how we are going to manage these patients. And because of so much information which is available, the patients more often than not, patients and their caregivers both have mental disorders. There is a high prevalence of anxiety and depression, and also panic disorders in patients and their caregivers. relaxation, and that's why the first counseling of the patients with pulmonary arterial hypertension which we have in our clinic lasts for at least an hour, so that we are sure we get comfortable as to what the patient and the family wants, how they, at what level they are, and then we can proceed with how we are going to manage these patients further. If you are sad, if you're depressed, and if you're suffering from a very, very bad disease such as a pulmonary arterial hypertension, there is going to be an effect on your employment. Subsequently, there is going to be effect on the household income, and that was studied in this study, and was published in 2013, which had shown a significant decrease in the income and on employment. And most of the times patient will ask us, can I do my daily activities or no? Because if we don't allow the patients to their daily activities and have a decent income, we are defeating the purpose of treating pulmonary arterial hypertension, right? So what we advise is slight modification in their day-to-day activities. Maybe they can have, they can change their work profile, they can work from home, and that can kind of help with their household incomes. It also keeps them mentally stable. And psychological assistance and counseling is the last thing, and that's where the PH clinic comes in, because we are a cohort of doctors, nurses, family, care providers, and social worker which come together in caring for the patient with pulmonary arterial hypertension. And as we have been repeatedly saying since yesterday morning, patients and parents empowerment is extremely important. Patient self-help groups, and that has what Pulmonary Hypertension Association has demonstrated in North America as well as Europe, is they can definitely, when the patients get involved in their own management, the prognosis and the treatment and the outlook completely changes. Unfortunately, it is virtually non-existent in India. There are certain groups such as the PH India. Again, it was started in 2011 or 2012, but we don't have too much progress on it. We are trying our best. We are planning to form and make an app which will give the patient, in association with Dr. Abraham Babu, we are trying to make an app which will tell the patient how to live actively with pulmonary arterial hypertension, but still there is a lot of work needs to be done. Other important issues, iron deficiency anemia, very, very important, because it has been shown, and the recent studies have shown, that if the patient has got iron deficiency, the prognosis is much worse as compared to those who have got normal iron stores. Hence, it's extremely important to look for evidence of anemia, evidence of iron deficiency in these patients. Phlebotomy for patients with Eisenmenger syndrome should only be done if they have symptoms of high PCV, or the PCV levels are very high, more than 65 to 70%. Maintain good hydration, care of IV lines, and adherence to treatment is extremely important. To conclude, medications are very important, but they're only a part in the treatment of pulmonary arterial hypertension. A significant number of serious events are related to ill-advised daily activity or unwarranted procedure. Non-pharmacological methods such as exercise training and rehabilitation are more often underutilized in patients with pulmonary hypertension. Strategies that promote patient and parents' engagement, achieve the best possible care, and patient support groups are a valuable source of education and emotional support. And last but not the least, all of this can be achieved if you have a specialized pulmonary hypertension clinic, and we are working on it so that we can standardize what a pulmonary hypertension clinic should be, what expertise you require, what medications and what counseling is required for these patients with pulmonary hypertension, and how we can do further to standardize the treatment in the country. Thank you.